Okay, so I'm recording. My name is Linda Akey. I own Competent Assistance for Nonprofits. And a year ago, I took over the networking for nonprofits Meetup group from a guy named Eric who had decided not to do it anymore. And then, COVID kind of hit, and actually we kind of changed it because COVID hit. But I didn't have a lot of interest at the time to be participating or have people participating via Zoom. So we're kind of getting this restarted to see if we can move that forward. In my business, I help new nonprofit organizations get started. So I write the 1023 applications. And I also, I set them up with the state that they're in. I help nonprofits all over the country, but most of my nonprofits are in Colorado and Washington that I help. I help them write strategic plans and board development and compliance issues, making sure that they understand the business of running and operating a nonprofit. So that's who I am. So I'd like to go around and invite others, and we'll introduce James at the end. So Dave?
Sure. Dave Boyce. I work for 501 Commons, who is a nonprofit. So, yeah.
I'm a member.
Oh, okay, great.
I'm a consultant member of 501 Commons.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the 501 Commons is an interesting nonprofit. We serve other nonprofits, so we don't specifically, have, feet on the ground, like running, for instance, like a food bank or something. We would be helping the food bank establish, services. I work in the technology solutions department of 501 Commons, which there's two different splits. One is IT and one is data solutions. Data solutions, we mostly do like Tableau, data visualization, Salesforce, and then we have other groups. We help with HR, we help with accounting, we have the referral network like Linda was pointing out, where people come to 501 Commons and can search through pre-qualified members that have been pre-screened by 501 Commons to serve nonprofits. So, thanks, glad to be here.
Cool, thank you for being here. And Catherine?
Sure, I'm with Artic. James is gonna be giving an intro to Artic, but I'm also involved in more of arts-based philanthropies, and I'm in Orange County, California, but I used to, back when I could, be up in the Seattle area quite a bit, mostly for work, but do have a lot of connections and folks up there. So yeah, I look forward to this discussion and anything that comes of it.
Wonderful. And Joel, you kind of expressed an interest in starting a nonprofit, but would you share a little bit more about yourself and what it is that you do now, and why you're, maybe share a little bit about your idea if you want, or kind of why you want to start a nonprofit?
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. My name is Joel Fuentes. I'm actually an entrepreneur, but I kind of want to give back, right? So the revenue that I'm going to be making, because I have a couple projects and I'm actually pitching them to investors, venture capitalists. I don't want it just to be for me. I kind of want to put it towards this nonprofit idea that I have in mind. It's called Voice for the Gen Z. So Generation Z, I'm pretty sure everyone has a rough history, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the matter of, okay, well, what's going to happen to the future generations now, right? We need to start focusing on building a platform where they could go and express what's happened in the past, express what they think, express what they want to talk about, without being limited by, big social media platforms shutting them out. No, you can't talk about this. No, you can't talk about that. No, you can't talk about this. So it's sort of kind of like a platform where Generation Z or even future generations that are coming up, like Generation Alpha, they're able to come and voice themselves. Not like how you would see on other social media platforms, or it's just a bunch of debates, because we don't want no one arguing, right? We want it to be a peaceful, friendly environment, and everyone wants to be welcomed. So that's kind of the idea I have in mind, and that's where I want to put my funding to. But other than that, nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you too. That sounds really fascinating. And I think definitely having an ability for people to have more and more conversations. There's so much to talk about right now. And having those safe spaces for those kind of conversations, I think is really important. So I think that's a good idea. Very cool. Well, I'll let James talk a little bit more, but I'll just do a quick introduction. So James Burke is the Senior Manager at Artic Consulting, and he's responsible for their nonprofit consulting practice. And James brings over 20 years of experience at Microsoft as a software engineer and project manager. And he volunteers for the Mars Society as its Director of Information Technology. And James is going to talk with us today about how to attract and motivate great volunteers that believe in the mission of the organization. And so I'm really glad to have you here and to share this, and that we're recording it so that we can make that available hopefully to others so they can see it later. So thank you.
Yeah, excellent. I'm really excited today to meet you guys and talk a little bit about how to motivate volunteers. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a few slides to show you guys. I promise I won't make it boring. And I do have a quick demo to show you as well of kind of tracking volunteers. Linda, if you wouldn't mind making me a presenter in Zoom. Awesome, thank you so much. Okay, so Artic, we've, as a company, Artic Consulting, we're a Gold Microsoft partner. We help both for-profit companies and nonprofit organizations, and we help them with their technology. We're Gold, I mentioned we're a Gold Microsoft partner. We also work with other technology vendors as well, like Google, Amazon, Zoho, and we have a lot of experience serving on nonprofit boards, so we can help nonprofits navigate a lot of these options. One of the things that nonprofits may not know is that they can actually get some free offers from the different technology vendors. So there's a lot of great programs out there, like for Microsoft, there's the philanthropy program, and there's Google for nonprofits. So if you're a 501c3 organization, there are several free offers you can get to help give your nonprofit technology solutions. And we can help you navigate those. We've done it for other clients in the nonprofit area, helping them get onto Microsoft Office, to get onto AWS, and helping them move off of legacy stuff, you know, aging infrastructure and things that aren't really working out well for them. One example is we had a nonprofit come to us because they were on GoDaddy and they had purchased some services through GoDaddy that they wanted to migrate off of, but they were having trouble. And so we helped them get onto the Microsoft offer, helped them migrate over their email and all their data. And now they're up and running, and they have a much reduced cost every month for all the things they were paying for through GoDaddy. We've also developed this nonprofit solutions framework. And so this is a roadmap for a nonprofit of all the things that technology is going to help you do. And I'm going to talk a bit today about that one in the top left, the volunteer management square. But all of these things on this slide are things we can help you figure out how to do if you're not currently doing, or if you are doing them, help you do them better with modern technology. So let's talk a little bit about volunteers, shall we? So when you're a nonprofit, volunteers are often the lifeblood of your operations, and attracting and motivating new volunteers, retaining them, making sure that they're producing well for your nonprofit, that they're, you know, helping you out with what you need. That is super important. And I'm going to kind of walk through how you can attract and motivate volunteers, but then also how to apply technology to help you do that. So attracting new volunteers really starts with having a clear and easy to understand mission statement for your organization. So something that someone that knows nothing about your nonprofit, you can explain to them really quickly and easily what your mission is, and they can believe in that. They can believe that that's something that they could support, and something that aligns with their own interests and their own like beliefs about how to make the world better. So having a program to attract new volunteers really starts with having a good mission and having that be articulated well. Second, you should have opportunities for volunteers that align with your mission and that allow them to feel like they're directly contributing to your mission. So it's hard to attract volunteers if your mission is one thing, but then you're going to ask them to do something really mundane like stuff envelopes. But if they understand that by stuffing the envelopes, they're getting the word out about what your organization is doing, or maybe they're helping you raise money for your mission, that would motivate them more than just the task of stuffing envelopes. Another thing to think of is, why do volunteers want to volunteer for your organization? What do they expect to do when they volunteer? And sometimes you can figure this out by talking to people that are new to the organization and saying, you know, before you came in, what did you expect to do for us? You know, and how does that align with what we actually asked you to do? Often volunteers want to be challenged. They want to learn new things. They want to volunteer for a long time and then move up in importance in the organization. And often they want to, they're able to do more than just the first thing they tried when they started as a volunteer. So it's good to challenge volunteers and give them more and more responsibility and give them tasks that may be difficult for them. As long as they're up for it, they could learn new skills that way. And so don't be afraid to sort of challenge a volunteer and give them an area of responsibility that might be a little bit of a stretch for them. Now, they also want to enjoy what they're doing, so you have to make it fun. You know, there's lots of ways to do that. It's having an upbeat attitude. It's maybe, you know, bringing treats or pizza or donuts or something like that while people are volunteering. It's, you know, maybe having some music going, but you know, there's always going to be ways to make it fun, and so that's one thing to focus on. And if people see other volunteers enjoying what they're doing, they're going to want to volunteer too. And then finally, volunteers will often join a nonprofit to meet new people and to build relationships. So if you have a volunteer that's a repeat volunteer, you might want to pair them with different people every time. This will allow them to meet new people and try out different activities as a volunteer. So that's also a really good thing to do, that to keep volunteers motivated. And then next I want to talk about, how do you keep volunteers? There was a study done by DonorBox recently, and they looked at what are the reasons, the top reasons why volunteers would leave a nonprofit. And you can see them there. Maybe the atmosphere was really impersonal or cold or tense. Maybe they weren't utilized enough. Maybe they made a suggestion that nobody acted on, or maybe they did act on it, but they never went back and thanked the volunteer for making that suggestion. Maybe there were cliques at the nonprofit, and the veteran long-term volunteers wouldn't really socialize with the new folks and kind of didn't let them into their insider group. So these are all things to watch out for. Making sure that a volunteer sees a connection between one day's work and another day's work, that what they're doing for the nonprofit is building on itself. Making sure that any senior long-term volunteers or senior staffers or employees are being welcoming to volunteers, and they're not looking at their questions as an interruption to their you know, whatever they're doing. That's an important thing. That will cause people to leave if they feel like, oh, every time I ask a question, I'm bothering the staff. Maybe it's just better that I'm not around. That would be better for the nonprofit. And then finally, the last bullet kind of goes into those expectations again that I mentioned on the last slide. The reality of their experience was maybe different when they before they volunteered than what they actually got to do. So again, checking in with them to understand like what they expect to do as a volunteer is important. And then when you have a team of volunteers that are doing well, how do you keep them motivated? I mentioned matching skills with available opportunities. That's definitely one to do. You know, and there may be volunteers that come to your nonprofit that have skills that you didn't realize you could use. But having an understanding of what someone's skills are could help your nonprofit in ways you haven't thought of. And talking to people about what else, asking them, what else could you help us with, can often be a question that opens up a lot of new areas for them to help. One idea to reward volunteers is to acknowledge them on social media or give them prizes as they're volunteering, maybe giving them at random, like little prizes that just keep people motivated. And then making sure that when someone starts out that you give them a little bit of hand holding, you do a little bit of extra check-in with them. And then also check in with them after their shift, after they're done, you know, volunteering, check in with them a day or a couple days later and just ask them, you know, how did that go for you? Was there anything you didn't like about it that maybe we can shift around? Did you see other opportunities with us that you may want to go after as well? So just keeping those lines of communication open is really a good way to motivate people and make them feel like they're part of the mission that you're doing and make them feel like their time is valuable to you. Because everyone's time is valuable and no one wants to feel like they're wasting their time volunteering. I also want to show this little Bill of Rights. This is a template that we have offered to some of our nonprofit clients before. This would be a way to, you could think of this as like a handout you might give to a new volunteer that tells them what rights they have as a volunteer for the nonprofit. Like one of the things that we learned looking at the donor box research is that sometimes people leave a nonprofit because they didn't know how to give feedback. They didn't know how to say, hey, this position you put me in isn't really working for me. Can we try something else? They didn't really feel like they had the ability to communicate that. And so being upfront and setting expectations that they're able to do that is a good thing to do. And on the second page, you can see the first responsibility there is to communicate your needs and communicate the feedback you have back to the nonprofit. So handing out something like this to someone that's new to volunteering really helps set their mindset the right way of what this is for them and how they fit into the organization. So we have this this template on our website, and it's available for anyone to take and tailor for whatever they need. So what I want to show next, I'm going to show something called Microsoft Sharepoint because I have this really quick volunteer tracking solution I threw together in here. And this is the kind of thing that you could do as a nonprofit with Microsoft software. So SharePoint is an online tool for storing documents. That's how it got started out. It's kind of like Google Drive or OneDrive. And you can see there's a few documents here, but you can also use SharePoint to store all different types of information. And so I'm going to show you this volunteer tracking spreadsheet that we have. It's basically a spreadsheet online in SharePoint. It's something called a SharePoint list. And so this fictional nonprofit called Cascade Food Bank would be tracking its volunteers, tracking their skills. And this solution can also do things like if someone is going to report hours into it, it'll actually total up all the time they volunteered and the last time they volunteered. And so if I'm a nonprofit leader, I can look at this list and I can find out sort of who are my top volunteers, who's been with us the longest, and what skills they have. And so a solution like this will really help you plan out, okay, we want to do this new initiative. Do we have some volunteers that we've worked with recently that could help us with that initiative? So tracking volunteers in this way is good for the nonprofit, but it's also good for the volunteer because the volunteers can get matched to opportunities easier and their time can get recorded and built up so that they, both the volunteer and the nonprofit know how much time they've put into the nonprofit. There's also times when, especially younger folks that are going to go into university or go into graduate programs, they need to know how much time they've put into a nonprofit and get a verification of that, so that they can provide it on their college application. And a solution like this can help the nonprofit manage stuff like that, help them really easily verify that a volunteer's worked so many hours. So the last thing I'll show you guys is just what a time tracking form would look like that works with this. And so I'm going to pop that one open. So this is using another piece of software from Microsoft called Forms, which again, a nonprofit can get a lot of this stuff for free if they're a 501c3. And this would allow, this is a form you could put it on an iPad and have it at an event where you have a bunch of volunteers and use it for people to sign in with. So I'll just go ahead and fill this out real quick so you can see the second screen. So the volunteer can put in, what day they volunteered, what they did, and how many hours, and then attest that they actually are putting in correct information. Now, if I were to submit this right now, it would go back into that Sharepoint list I showed, and the total number of hours I put in for that form would actually get added into this number here. So these things are work together. They work together seamlessly using a little bit of technology from Microsoft called Power Automate, which again, it's really easy for a nonprofit to procure this stuff, and we can help you set things like this up and really tailor them for your organization and however you want to work with your volunteers. So I've shown you guys a lot. I'll go ahead and pause here and ask if there are any questions.
So I have some questions, and I thought we could kind of also make this a little bit interactive on the Q&A if James is okay, or people can raise their hands using the raise hand function. So that's fine too. So couple things. First is, have you ever worked with volunteer job descriptions and what kind of benefits those could offer the nonprofit and or the volunteer?
Yeah, absolutely. So having a good job description to solicit volunteers is a really great way to set those expectations up front. You can put in a job description the same type of stuff you'd put in a for-profit company's job description, things like, here are the responsibilities of the volunteer, what we expect them to do, here's the experience we're looking for a good volunteer candidate, here's how we're going to select the volunteers that we're going to have work for us, and any skills that we might be looking for, both skills that are required and skills that are nice to have.
Yeah, I think it's a really great idea as well. And sometimes volunteer jobs turn into paid positions. And so sometimes it's really nice to be able to have them. Usually I found with some nonprofits that I've worked with, they have like the job descriptions are very small in terms of a volunteer, but you put like 3 or 4 of those together and they become like a full-time paid position. But it's also really nice to be able to start with some of those volunteer jobs and see how they work with a volunteer, and if you really can do that with volunteers, or if you really need to have paid positions for those. But it kind of starts them off the right track for job descriptions. So I agree. I think that's really good. And another question, and I like to put it this way, but you did bring up appreciation of volunteers, and I call it, what is the love language of that person? What is it that they like? Some people like, just a quick, hey, that was a really good job as you pass by them in the hall. Other people, like myself, like to publicly receive a, hey, you did really good. Or, having certificates that you give at the end of the year, or I've seen organizations do volunteer events that only honor certain volunteers, and I kind of don't suggest that. I suggest that if you have a volunteer event, that you actually honor every volunteer, because whether they put in 1 hour a year or 100 hours a year, they're giving of their time. And that's always valuable, regardless of, what they do. So I found that that can be more inclusive. Have you seen that also in the work that you've done, James?
Yeah, I have, and I really like how you described it as their love languages. Like, I think there's a book about like what are the 5 love languages for people? How do they like to get recognition, and what motivates them? People are different. People have different personalities, and to your point, if you overly thank one person, another one that didn't get thanked that way might feel bad, and their like few hours of volunteer time was more of a sacrifice for them than the person that spent a ton of time, right? So everything is relative with people, and you should try to be fair if you're recognizing people, and be equal about it. Yeah, I know for me, and this goes for some people, other people too, I've seen in my career, that they don't like to get the recognition. They don't like to publicly get pulled up on stage and handed an award. Like, for some people, that's embarrassing. They'd rather just like get a nice note, or like a Starbucks gift card, or maybe even just get asked to come back and do a different role. Like, that's a big deal for them. So it really depends. And it's maybe good to have that conversation with someone that you really value as a volunteer and say, hey, I really like the work you're doing for us. How can we reward you? Like, what would you like for us to do to recognize you for what you've done? Because it's a big deal.
And I think that it's something else that you can put in that tracking system, so that everybody's aware about how that person likes to be rewarded. Because, sometimes in the larger organizations, you might have different people, that you're interacting with or something like that. And so it's kind of nice to be able to know how that person likes to be appreciated. So yeah, I think that's great. And then I want to talk a little bit about volunteer onboarding. So I've worked in both organizations that don't have onboarding and organizations that do have onboarding. Can you talk a little bit about what onboarding is and what that might look like for organizations, and what can happen maybe if they don't have a successful onboarding program?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of different levels of onboarding. Essentially, what onboarding is you're getting someone up and running with whatever the role that you're asking them to do. So, for example, if you have a volunteer at a bicycle race that's going to like take tickets, you're going to spend a few minutes with them saying, okay, this is what you do to take the tickets, and here's what you need to record, and here's who you need to turn the sheet into at the end of the event. So something like that would be onboarding for that volunteer. And it could be also really detailed. It could, you might need to put someone through a week of training to become a volunteer, to do something really technical or specific for your nonprofit. So I think it's important for every nonprofit to think of what they need to do for onboarding, even if it is something minor. I know for some of the things I did at the Mars Society, we had volunteers help us with our conference. And so we would have a meeting before the conference to just kind of set expectations of what we wanted them to do during the conference, and how to reach out for help, and just reassure them that we're there for them. Like, even though you're a new volunteer, we're all in this together. We're all in this to put the conference on together. If you need something, like, just ask, and we're going to help you. We're going to jump right in and help. Don't ever feel overwhelmed. So, and that, just having that, saying those words meant a great deal to some people, whereas they might have felt like, oh my gosh, this is too much for me. I can't do this. I'm going to leave, So, and I've seen that too. So.
Yeah. I think it's really good about setting those expectations for people, because sometimes they'll sign up for something and they think it's one thing, but when they get there, it's something else. Maybe, so yeah, I think that's really good to be able to let people know once they're there, hey, we really appreciate you being here, and here's, what we need for today.
Yeah, and
stuff.
I think, and I think that setting expectations is really important, because it's a two-way street there. If someone doesn't really understand what's needed of them, sometimes they'll do the wrong thing for you, but having the best intentions of it. So.
Yeah, very cool. So I love the tools that you were showing today. how do people get access to those tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do consultations with nonprofits. We do like a free 15-minute consultation to sort of see where someone is. We can help you apply for those. You can, Google, Microsoft, others have forms to fill out, but we can kind of help you walk through it, make sure that you're understanding what you're signing up for. And then once you get those tools, help you onboard with them and make sure that they're going to fit into the way your organization operates currently. In some cases, you may need to train your staff on some of the tools. Even though they're free, there may be some training that you need to do. There may be some tailoring of the tool to fit into what you're currently doing at the nonprofit. So we can help do all that. Even if we're not the ones to go do the training and do the work, we can at least point out that you're going to need that. And so talking to us is a great first step to that journey.
Excellent. Are there other questions that people have?
I had a question. I had a question, but it just lost my train of thought right now. I have like 10 million things popping in my mind.
There's a lot to know when you're starting a nonprofit, and volunteer recruitment, retention, and rewarding is the big three when you're dealing with the volunteers, making sure that everyone feels valued and respected and appreciated throughout the process of being there and with the organization. And the more that you can cultivate those volunteers, the stronger the nonprofit can be. So it's a really important topic, and it's hard to do. It's a lot harder than what people might think. A lot of companies have volunteer management directors or coordinators. Sometimes they're volunteers, but sometimes they're paid positions, and they do all of that work with the volunteers, getting them set into place and doing training and rewarding them and setting up a volunteer appreciation event, or all those kind of things. So there's a lot of different ways to be able to work with managing the nonprofit volunteer, but it's a lot. One little aspect of running a nonprofit.
Okay, yeah. So the question that I had, it's kind of regarding volunteers, but what platforms do we use to try to attract volunteers? I would be attracting Generation Z volunteers, and I know there's a lot on Slack, but other than that, I'm not really sure what other platforms.
Yeah, you got to think about where those folks spend their time now, right? So I think for Gen Z, I would recommend you get into TikTok and do some type of TikTok video to recruit volunteers, because that's what they're doing, right? You got to think about who are the kind of volunteers you want to attract, and where do they hang out. And since we're all having to deal with COVID, most of the time you're going to think about where they hang out online. But when we get back to normal, hopefully, you'd think about where could I like put up flyers? Where could I go talk to people about my nonprofit? Is there a way I could get in front of a group and talk about my nonprofit for 2 minutes and get volunteers that way? But you think through, like, what are the types of, like, not just Gen Z, obviously that's your main criteria, but are there specific groups within Gen Z that would be appealing for that would think your nonprofit is appealing to them? So
yeah, and places like this group, like this meetup, is one place. Washington Nonprofits is a nonprofit association that has a lot of nonprofits involved with it, and they have a lot of events that are going on, and that's one place that you'll meet people as well. And then working with certain kinds of companies that have younger people is a good place. So my thought would be some of the online company, social media companies, Google, Amazon, or some other places that have, many of these companies have volunteer programs where they encourage people to volunteer. And so that could be another resource to reach out to. And then for tracking methods, I mean, James showed one, and there's other kinds out there. What James is showing is a free app, and so that's really good because there's not a ton of those. So it's really good to hear about some programs that are out there that are free. So does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Linda. And I don't know if Dave is still, I know he had to jump away, but would also interacting with an organization like his. I know we have one here called 10C. Even if you're new, to get started and reach out to them, because they are, they're great connectors as well to people who are interested in philanthropy and want to do work. And they may even also help you get off the ground. I'm not sure what their charters are and what they're looking for as far as their support, but I know same thing in Orange County. We have some organizations that support a lot of the philanthropies here in a lot of different ways. So it would also be good, I would assume, to tap into that in the area.
Yeah. So I'm still learning about all the nonprofit resources here in Washington because I'm still new to Washington. But in Colorado, we have some organizations that have younger people that are part of these philanthropy groups. And so it's always nice to be able to connect kind of with some of those groups to try and reach out. And that would, for me, I can't necessarily name any off the top of my head for Washington State at this moment, but it's always a good idea to have good relationships with the other nonprofits in the area and some of the foundations and things like that. So that's a really good idea, Catherine.
Yeah, I think here in Seattle, some of the really big ones are United Way of King County and the Seattle Foundation. The Seattle Foundation does a lot of programs in Seattle to help the community. And then there's things like, the different museums will have their own nonprofit foundations, like the Seattle Art Museum and the Mopop Museum. So
in Colorado, they have something called Metro Volunteers, and it literally is a volunteer hub. Like all the volunteers go there and they connect them with all the nonprofits. And so all the nonprofits are registered with Metro Volunteers. And then it's kind of like a job board where they're matching up all of these volunteers. And so, and of all different ages and types. But I'm not familiar with that kind of program out here. But it's a really cool connection. So if there's something like that, I'm just not familiar yet if I've heard of anything like that here in Washington.
Yeah, the only thing like that I've seen, there is a Facebook group called Seattle Volunteers. I think it's Seattle Tech Volunteers. And I've tried to post stuff there before, and I didn't really get anywhere, so I don't know how active it is. But now that would be neat. Another thing to do is just go to the universities in any town and put up a flyer. A lot of them will have a job board or a place for volunteers to organizations to solicit volunteers. So
yeah, and the high schools too. I mean, high schools and colleges all have that community service kind of requirement thing. So if you can tap into that, but maybe that's the next new nonprofit in Seattle is connecting volunteers like they do in Colorado. Not that we need to start another nonprofit. There's about 50,000 of them in Washington State. So
yeah,
and another 35,000 in Colorado.
Yeah, there's quite a few here.
Mhm.
And of course, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that's another huge one I didn't mention earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the foundations, but not all of the foundations are doing volunteer connection programs.
Right.
So, so yeah, I'm just not familiar with all of the ones that might be doing those kind of programs, but it is good to know about the sector and where you can reach into people, you know, tap into things. So that's why Washington nonprofits and 501 Commons are good areas to get information on, because they have a really good pulse on all of the nonprofit community. Of course, Seattle Foundation does too, you know, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is kind of specific in terms of the type of people that work for them.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of Microsoft people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I could get a job at that foundation. Just I've been reading their job postings, and it seems like if you have Microsoft experience, like it, and have worked for Microsoft, that it kind of dovetails. Like the way that they run the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation seems to me to be similar as to how they would run Microsoft, which makes sense. But anyway, I think it's interesting. It's just a culture thing. But I don't know, maybe they'd hire people that didn't work for Microsoft. Any other questions? Okay, so before we end, I'm really curious what others thought about the Mars landing. So Joel, did you watch it? Did you see it? What do you think?
So I was watching it on Facebook, right? And then I was told it was going to land at like 12:35 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then I needed to go to a meeting. So I couldn't actually watch it land.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. Like maybe one day we'll have actual, like we'll have people on Mars actually. Like that might happen in your lifetime, Joel.
It will, most definitely.
I don't know if it'll happen in mine.
Elon's working hard right now on the Starship rockets that are built down in Boca Chica, Texas, and he'll be flying one around the moon in a few years. And then the date right now is 2026 to get the first Mars cargo mission going. Every 2 years you can launch a rocket to Mars. You can't just do it anytime because you have to wait for the Earth and Mars to line up. But 2026 is what they're projecting right now. So then maybe the first crew would go out in 2 years after that. So it could be before the end of this decade, actually, that we see people on Mars.
Wow.
So Catherine, are we going to see you on Mars?
You know, it's a great question. And I was very excited about when I was a kid, very into, you know, wanting to be an astronaut and pursuing that quite a bit. But I think I'm going to leave that to the professionals. Perhaps if we're a little further along and I was a little younger, maybe, but I'm
with you. I'm really fascinated by it. Like I just think it's wonderful. I think it's really cool. I'm like, hey, this is pretty neat.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I was, you know, when I was very involved and excited about it, it was more, it was less about Mars, sorry, James, but it was more about just what things we didn't know about and what could be done, you know, in space, quote unquote. And I think with the space station and with obviously with the introduction of a plethora of satellites and different things that those things are, you know, giving society just, you know, the possibility of internet for anyone at any place. Those types of things, I think I was a little bit more jazzed about than being on Mars. But, you know, again, that was a while ago. So. But it's certainly exciting to see those things come to fruition now.
Isn't it?
That was kind of just maybe we can get that stuff done.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that's really cool too. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. I know we'd set this for an hour and a half, and I think if we had a few more people here, we'd go that long today. Hopefully we'll have more people. the next one. So hopefully we can do this in a month, but it's really great to meet everybody and to have everybody here. Any last words, James?
I'm just thank you all for coming, and you know, good luck with Joel. Good luck with your plans to start a nonprofit. If we can help you at all, I'm sure we would love to. And hope to see you next month if we and when we do this again. So don't be a stranger.
Great. Can I add something? So before I start my official nonprofit, though, I think I would like to get some volunteering experience myself. I actually haven't had any. So if there are any available openings, let me know. I'd love to.
Yeah. So going directly to the nonprofits is always a really great idea. And like James mentioned, United Way is a nice place to start because they often have information about the nonprofits that they work with. And Washington nonprofits can also help you. So if you just Google Washington nonprofits, it'll bring up their website, and they also will probably have some information on that as well.
Awesome. All right, great. I'm looking into it right now. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. I'm going to stop the recording.